Over 12 U.S. Navy warships, backed by surveillance aircraft and attack submarines, moved into strategic positions across the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical oil choke point. The operation began quietly, but within hours, multiple Iranian-linked cargo vessels were tracked, intercepted, and forced to change course. Military sources confirm over 10,000 U.S. personnel are now active in the region, enforcing what officials call an expanded global blockade. But behind the scenes, Iranian naval units have also mobilized, and one wrong move could ignite a direct naval clash. This is not a drill. This is not another routine military exercise. What you are witnessing right now is one of the most dangerous escalations in U.S.-Iran tensions in over a decade, and it's unfolding in real time. At approximately 02:40 a.m. Gulf Standard Time, radar signatures began lighting up across multiple monitoring stations in the Persian Gulf. According to confidential informants within regional maritime command centers, at least 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers shifted positions simultaneously, forming a staggered blockade formation near the narrowest point of the strait, just 21 miles wide at its tightest choke. Within minutes, P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft were airborne, scanning vessel movements with precision. Insider sources say these aircraft weren't just observing, they were actively guiding interception maneuvers. That's when things took a turn. At 04:15 a.m., the first Iranian-linked tanker, flagged under a third-party registry but tracked for months by U.S. intelligence, was ordered to halt. It didn't comply immediately. And for nearly 7 minutes, tensions spiked to a level that one U.S. Navy officer described as seconds away from engagement. I need you to understand how serious this is, because this wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next 6 hours, at least 5 additional vessels were intercepted under similar conditions. Some complied, others attempted evasive maneuvers. And each time, U.S. naval forces tightened their grip, enforcing what officials are now calling a maritime containment strategy targeting Iran's economic lifeline, its oil exports. But here's where it gets even more dangerous. According to insider sources within U.S. Central Command, this operation was not publicly announced for a reason. It was designed to be deniable in its early phase, a shadow blockade, if you will, aimed at crippling Iran's shipping routes without triggering immediate international backlash. And yet, it didn't stay quiet for long. By 09:30 a.m., Iranian state-linked media outlets began reporting unauthorized foreign interference in commercial shipping lanes. Within an hour, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, had deployed fast attack craft from Bandar Abbas. Satellite imagery reviewed by independent analysts shows at least 8 vessels moving at high speed toward contested waters. This is the moment everything changed, because now you have U.S. warships enforcing a blockade and Iranian naval units actively pushing back. 2 forces, heavily armed, operating within miles of each other in one of the most volatile regions on Earth. Stay with me, because what happened next will shock you. At 11:05 a.m., a brief but highly encrypted communication was intercepted, a transmission believed to originate from an Iranian command vessel. While the full contents remain classified, one line has been confirmed by multiple intelligence leaks. We cannot allow this to continue. Those 7 words have sent shockwaves through military circles. Why? Because they suggest intent. Not just resistance, but potential escalation. And here's the part no one is talking about publicly. Behind this entire operation lies a much bigger objective, one that goes beyond oil tankers and shipping lanes. According to a high-level confidential informant with direct knowledge of Pentagon planning, this deployment is part of a broader strategy to pressure Iran into a forced economic chokehold within 30 days. 30 days. That's the window being discussed behind closed doors. But Iran is not standing still. In fact, sources close to Tehran indicate that contingency plans have already been activated, including the potential mining of key al-Bahariya routes and the use of swarm tactics by smaller vessels to overwhelm larger U.S. ships. I need you to understand how serious this is, because if even one missile is fired, if even one ship is hit, the consequences won't stay contained in the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 20% of the world's oil passes through this corridor. A disruption here doesn't just affect the region. It sends shockwaves through global markets, energy supplies, and potentially triggers a wider conflict. And yet, despite all this, officials remain tight-lipped. No official declaration of blockade, No formal acknowledgement of escalation, just movements, positioning, and silence. But silence in situations like this is often the loudest warning of all. Now, here's the question you need to be asking yourself. Why now? Why did the US choose this exact moment to surround Iran's lifeline? What triggered this sudden, coordinated military pressure? Because according to multiple insider sources, something happened just 48 hours before this operation began, something that changed the entire equation. And in part 2, we're going to break that down step by step, including the timeline, the hidden triggers, and the decisions made behind closed doors that brought both nations to the edge of confrontation. What you're about to hear next will make this entire situation even more alarming. To understand why this moment is so explosive, you have to go back not just days, but years, because what you're seeing right now didn't happen overnight. This is the result of a slow, calculated buildup that has been intensifying beneath the surface, waiting for the right trigger. Let's start with a key date, May 8, 2018. That's when then-President Donald Trump officially withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal. The JCPOA. Within weeks, sanctions snapped back into place, targeting Iran's oil exports, banking system, and shipping networks. At the time, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called it economic warfare. And in many ways, he wasn't wrong. From that point forward, the Persian Gulf became a pressure zone. Fast forward to June 13, 2019. 2 oil tankers, one Norwegian-owned, one Japanese-operated, were attacked near the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. blamed Iran. Iran denied involvement. But here's what insider sources revealed later. U.S. surveillance drones had already been tracking unusual IRGC naval activity hours before the explosions. That was the first clear signal that this choke point could be weaponized. Now jump to January 3, 2020. A U.S. drone strike in Baghdad kills General Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's most powerful military figures. Within days, Iran retaliates with missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq. For a brief moment, the world believed a full-scale war was imminent, but then things cooled down, at least on the surface. Behind the scenes, however, something very different was happening. Confidential informants within regional intelligence networks say both sides shifted strategies. Instead of direct confrontation, they moved into what's known as gray zone warfare, cyber attacks, proxy conflicts, covert operations, and most importantly, maritime pressure. Now, here's where the timeline becomes critical. On March 28, 2026, just weeks ago, a lesser-known but highly significant event took place. A Panamanian-flagged tanker, later identified by insider sources as carrying Iranian crude under a masked registry, was quietly seized near the Arabian Sea by a coalition naval unit believed to be operating under U.S. coordination. No major headlines. No official statements. But in Tehran, it was seen as a direct provocation. And that wasn't the only move. By April 2nd, 2026, U.S. Central Command had already begun repositioning assets. Satellite data confirms that 2 carrier strike groups adjusted their patrol routes, moving closer to the Gulf region. At the same time, intelligence sharing agreements between the U.S., UK, and regional allies were intensified. One confidential informant described it as a synchronized tightening of the net. What I'm about to tell you next changes everything. On April 14, 2026, just 72 hours before the warships moved into the strait, a classified briefing took place inside the Pentagon. According to insider sources who have seen fragments of the report, U.S. intelligence had intercepted communications suggesting that Iran was preparing to significantly increase its oil exports through covert shipping routes, bypassing sanctions at a scale not seen in years. We're talking about dozens of vessels operating under false flags, moving through complex routing networks designed to avoid detection. For Washington, this was a red line, because if Iran successfully flooded the market with sanctioned oil, it wouldn't just weaken U.S. economic pressure, it would undermine the entire sanctions regime globally. And that's something the U.S. simply cannot afford. So the decision was made at approximately 1920 Eastern Time on April 15, 2026. Authorization was reportedly given for what insiders are now calling Operation Silent Gate. The objective? Establish immediate maritime dominance over key transit routes and intercept any vessel suspected of carrying Iranian crude. No announcement, no press release, just action. I need you to understand how serious this is. Because this wasn't just about stopping ships. This was about sending a message, not just to Iran, but to the entire world, that the United States is willing to enforce its sanctions physically, not just economically. And Iran saw it as an act of aggression. By the early hours of April 16th, Iranian naval commanders had already convened emergency meetings. According to confidential informants close to the IRGC, multiple response scenarios were discussed, including direct confrontation, asymmetric attacks, and even the temporary closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Let that sink in. The complete closure of the strait. If that happens, oil prices don't just rise, they explode. Global supply chains don't just slow, they fracture. And yet, despite the risk, both sides kept moving forward. Now here's where the tension becomes almost unbearable. At 6:50 a.m. on April 16th, just hours before the first interception you heard about in Part 1, an Iranian fast attack craft reportedly approached within 2.3 nautical miles of a U.S. destroyer. That's extremely close. Close enough for visual identification. Close enough for a single miscalculation to trigger a chain reaction. But no shots were fired. Not yet. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. Because while all of this was happening on the surface, something even more alarming was unfolding beneath it. According to a high-level confidential informant within a European intelligence agency, there are indications that Iran may have already deployed underwater assets, possibly naval mines or unmanned submersibles, in key sections of the strait. This has not been confirmed publicly, but if it's true, it means the battlefield isn't just visible ships and aircraft. It's hidden threats, waiting, silent, and potentially devastating. And that brings us back to right now: U.S. warships in position, Iranian vessels mobilizing, surveillance aircraft scanning every movement, and a narrow stretch of water that has become the center of global tension. If you've made it this far, you already understand this is not just another headline. This is a moment that could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. And if you want real-time breakdowns like this, the kind you won't hear on mainstream media, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because what's coming next, you won't want to miss. Because in Part 3, we're going to reveal the one development that both sides were trying to keep hidden, the move that closes the loop on everything you've heard so far, and the reason military insiders are now saying we may already be past the point of no return. Now we come to the moment everything connects, the missing piece that explains why this operation unfolded so quickly, so aggressively, and why both sides are now operating like a direct clash is no longer a possibility, but a probability. Because according to multiple insider sources and confidential informants across two separate intelligence networks, one of the Iranian-linked vessels intercepted during the early hours of April 16th was not just carrying crude oil. It was carrying something far more sensitive. At approximately 04:52 a.m. Gulf Standard Time, just 37 minutes after the first tanker was ordered to halt, U.S. naval surveillance flagged abnormal cargo density readings aboard a vessel operating under a Liberian registry. On the surface, it appeared to be a standard crude shipment, but thermal imaging and deep scan radar told a different story. There were sealed compartments, shielded from conventional scanning, arranged in a configuration that one U.S. defense analyst described as inconsistent with commercial oil transport. That's when the situation escalated from enforcement to potential interdiction of strategic materials. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear was never meant to go public. According to a high-level confidential informant with direct access to internal briefings, U.S. intelligence had reason to believe that this vessel was transporting components linked to Iran's advanced missile systems, possibly guidance modules or propulsion elements intended for transfer to a proxy group outside Iranian territory. Let that sink in. This wasn't just about oil anymore. This was about weapons movement under the cover of commercial shipping through one of the most heavily monitored waterways in the world. And that explains the urgency. That explains the scale of the response. That explains why over 12 warships moved into position almost simultaneously. Because if those components reach their destination, it could shift the balance of power in an entirely different theater. And possibly within days. I need you to understand how serious this is. Because at 05:03 a.m., just minutes after the cargo anomaly was confirmed, a classified directive was issued to the nearest U.S. destroyer: prepare for boarding. This is the point where everything could have gone wrong. Boarding an Iranian-linked vessel in contested waters is not just risky, it's explosive. It's the kind of action that can trigger immediate retaliation. And for nearly 9 minutes, that's exactly what it looked like was about to happen. According to insider sources, IRGC fast attack craft were already en route. Estimated time to contact under 12 minutes. You now have U.S. boarding teams preparing to intercept a suspicious vessel and Iranian forces racing toward the same location. But then, something unexpected happened. At 05:11 a.m., the vessel in question abruptly altered course. No warning, no communication, just a sharp deviation, moving out of the projected interception path and heading southeast away from the strait's main channel. Why? That's the question that has analysts divided. Some believe it was a tactical retreat and an attempt to avoid direct confrontation and buy time. Others, including a senior naval strategist who spoke under condition of anonymity, suggest something far more calculated, that the vessel had already completed a partial offload before being tracked, and what remained on board was only part of the shipment. In other words, the real cargo may already be gone. That's the possibility no one is ready to confirm publicly. And if it's true, it means the operation you're seeing right now might be reacting to something that already slipped through. Now here's the pattern interrupt that changes everything. At 06:22 a.m., less than 90 minutes after the initial interception, global oil markets experienced a sudden spike, nearly 8% in under 20 minutes. That kind of movement doesn't happen without a trigger. According to confidential informants within financial monitoring groups, automated trading systems picked up on classified maritime alerts, signals that something major was unfolding in the strait. So while governments stayed silent, the markets reacted instantly. That's how real this is, and it doesn't stop there. By midday, April 16th, multiple countries began issuing quiet advisories to their commercial fleets. The United Kingdom's Maritime Authority raised its threat level. A European naval coalition reportedly shifted patrol routes. Even regional allies began repositioning assets, not publicly, but enough to signal concern. Because when you see this kind of coordinated movement, it means one thing: escalation is no longer contained. But here's where the tension reaches its peak. At 12:47 p.m., a second vessel, also linked to Iranian shipping networks, was intercepted. This time, there was no hesitation. U.S. forces moved aggressively, establishing a perimeter and issuing direct compliance orders. And this time, Iranian vessels were already within visual range. Two sides, one narrow corridor, weapons locked, decisions being made in seconds. No shots fired, but the margin for error? Practically zero. I need you to understand how serious this is. Because according to a confidential informant embedded within a regional command structure, there was a moment, brief but critical, where a targeting system was activated on one of the U.S. ships. Not fired, not launched, but activated. That's the closest we've come so far. And yet the most dangerous part is what hasn't happened yet. Because both sides are now fully aware of each other's positions, capabilities, and intentions. The element of surprise is gone. What remains is pressure and the constant risk of miscalculation. Now we're at the point where everything hangs in the balance. What you've just heard isn't just a sequence of events, it's a chain reaction. And right now, that chain is still moving. The question is not whether something will happen next, it's what kind of outcome we're heading toward. Because according to multiple insider sources and confidential informants, military planners on both sides are already preparing for 3 very specific scenarios, each one more dangerous than the last. The first scenario is controlled de-escalation. This is the outcome diplomats are quietly pushing for behind the scenes. It would involve back-channel negotiations, likely through intermediaries like Oman or Switzerland, where both sides agree to step back just enough to avoid direct confrontation. In this case, the U.S. would ease its maritime enforcement slightly, Iran would pull back its naval units, and both sides would publicly frame it as a misunderstanding or a temporary security measure. But here's the problem. According to a senior diplomatic source, trust between Washington and Tehran is at its lowest point since 2020. And after what's already happened, the interceptions, the near-boarding, the activation of targeting systems, walking this back without appearing weak is incredibly difficult. So while de-escalation is possible, it's fragile, and it can collapse in an instant. The second scenario is prolonged standoff. This is where things get tense and stay tense. In this situation, U.S. warships maintain their positions, continuing to monitor and intercept vessels, while Iranian forces mirror those movements, staying close enough to challenge but not engage. It becomes a game of pressure, constant, exhausting, and incredibly risky. Think about what that means for you. Every day that this standoff continues, global oil markets remain unstable. Shipping companies reroute or delay cargo. Insurance rates spike, and all it takes is one miscommunication, one radar misread, one aggressive maneuver to turn a standoff into a firefight. I need you to understand how serious this is. Because this kind of prolonged tension doesn't just affect governments, it affects economies, energy prices, and ultimately everyday lives. But then there's the third scenario, and this is the one military insiders are most concerned about: direct confrontation. This is the scenario where a single incident, a warning shot, a collision, a misinterpreted signal, triggers an immediate response. U.S. forces engage, Iranian forces retaliate, and within hours, the conflict spreads beyond the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about missile strikes on regional bases, cyber attacks targeting infrastructure, proxy groups activating across multiple countries, a localized naval clash turning into a regional war. And once that starts, it's very hard to contain. According to a confidential informant within a European defense ministry, contingency plans are already being reviewed for exactly this situation. Evacuation protocols, air seeker, supply chain rerouting, the 5% or 6 in therefore, even energy rationing scenarios in worst-case projections. That's how close this is being taken at the highest levels. Now, here's the part that should really make you stop and think. Because while all of this is happening in a narrow stretch of water thousands of miles away, the impact doesn't stay there. It spreads fast. Oil prices surge, inflation rises. Political tensions escalate, and suddenly a confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz becomes a global issue. This is one of those moments in history where everything is connected, and you are living through it in real time. I need you to understand how serious this is, because decisions being made right now in command centers, on naval bridges, in secure briefing rooms could shape the next decade of global stability. So where does this go from here? That's the question no one can answer with certainty. But what we do know is this: both sides are locked in position. Both sides are aware of the stakes, and neither side wants to be the first to back down. That's what makes this so dangerous, because when two forces reach that point, the margin for error disappears. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this situation will de-escalate, or are we heading toward a direct conflict between the United States and Iran? Drop your answer in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and these discussions are more important now than ever. And if you want to stay ahead of stories like this, the ones that unfold in real time with details you won't hear anywhere else, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because as this situation develops, you'll want to be informed, not surprised. This isn't over, not even close.